Coming up in my conversation with Chris Hannan, sports executive, his connection to Jim Brown. Plus, where does he stand with his USC UCLA allegiance? He's a professor as well. What are his ways of teaching? Plus, coaching. He was a coach for his daughters as they were growing up. What kind of coach was he? A lot of the personal stuff that even you might be his best friend, you didn't know about. You're going to find out right now. I promise my guests we are going to have a good time, and I certainly am a man of my word. It is Chris Hannan. He is head of sports for Trailer Park Group. He is also adjunct professor over at his alma mater, Syracuse, which is where my wife went. So obviously we're going to have a connection there as well. And Chris joins me on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is a sports media podcast where we not only highlight what those are doing in the working world, but love to sort of highlight the human side as well. Chris, you're obviously welcome on. You're familiar with this program. I've had a lot of your friends and a lot of your colleagues on, and we finally got a time to get you on. So needless to say, I'm excited to have you on as a guest.
Well, thank you. And I didn't know that about your wife. So now I'm even, happier to know that you got more than brewing and you got some orange in you too. So that's great.
I do. Although before we started this conversation, at least recording wise, we were talking about women's sports and the intersection of how women's basketball is in LA right now. You've got two top 10 teams in USC, UCLA. As we taped this a few days ago, USC and Juju Watkins, they went off against number one UCLA. So now UCLA drops a few spots in the rankings. But from your perspective, having two daughters and to see how the explosion of women's sports in general, but also in Los Angeles between two basketball powerhouses, what has that been like from your perspective?
Yeah, I do. Two daughters that weren't basketball players, mind you. One was a very good soccer player. But it fascinates me because I think women's sports are at an inflection point. Even look at the Nike ad. Everybody's talking about the Super Bowl ad from Nike, which is the first time they've been back in the Super Bowl, and that featured Caitlin and Juju Watkins and a host of others. But watching it, I saw Juju Watkins play in high school because before she went to Sierra Canyon, she went to a school called Windward, where she was a year younger than my younger daughter. So I got to see her play a couple times in ninth and 10th grade. And I was just in awe then. And then you see the performance. I think she is as good as Caitlin Clark is, and as amazing as Caitlin Clark is. I think Juju, when she comes into the WNBA, I mean, you have the potential for a Magic Larry Bird situation of the early 80s when you talk about Caitlin Clark and Juju. And then the fact that she goes and beats UCLA, who's undefeated number one, and kind of carries the team down the stretch. I think it's exciting. I think it's fantastic. I think it's great for sports, and even Unrivaled. I watched the one-on-one, to watch that just to, see how that was over the weekend. I thought that was really cool that Unrivaled did the one-on-one competition and sort of leading the charge with that in women's basketball.
Why do you think, and obviously people are seeing this now, the growth and evolution of women's sports. What do you feel like really was the spark plug in the last few years to really lead to this launch pad, this explosion?
I mean, Title IX is what, 50 some odd years old now, so, I think some of it goes back that far to Title IX, but I just think a lot of it's generational. It's that, now that over the past 25, 30 years, women are starting to get, the opportunities, the resources, the support that the men have gotten forever. And then it takes generations, it's not overnight. So now you have young girls who grew up with moms who were soccer players, tennis players, volleyball players, basketball players. And I just think it's also, you look at things like Girl Dad, right? Which Kobe kind of made famous. And I was a girl dad, you know. So I think that has a lot to do with it. It's just generational, and it's about time.
You're a girl dad, but what about when you were playing the role of parent, watching your daughters in an athletic competition? If I'm sitting next to you in the stands, Chris, what is this guy next to me going to be like?
So you weren't sitting next to me ever, because as my wife joked and everybody joked, traveling all over Southern California in the competitive club circuit, uh, I literally would sit by myself in a chair down at the end so nobody could hear what I'm mumbling to myself. And I was pretty good as my daughter got older not to say too much to her when she was playing. When she was younger, when I was coaching her, I was probably talking to her too much. But I started to learn, the best thing a dad or a parent can do on the sideline is cheer and shut up, you know. But I would mumble to myself. So I would sit off by myself so that nobody could hear what I was saying to myself during these matches.
How often after matches would one of your daughters want to talk about what just
Right.
happened and that she's actually asking for your feedback or just
Right.
sort of giving her thoughts on how she played?
So what's interesting is, for a few years, I was on the Positive Coaching Alliance's board. I was involved in After School All Stars. I was involved with AYSO. So a couple of these youth sports organizations that I think really have unbelievable pillars and educational tools. So I learned, when you get in, whether it's little league, whether you have a son, a daughter, it doesn't matter whether they're 5 or 15, after the game, don't talk about it. Let them bring it up. But when you get in the car to drive home, talk to them about what they're doing that night. Talk to them about their homework. Talk to them about anything but that. And so I got really good at that. After a few years with my daughter, we'd be traveling up and down Southern California. That often our drive was an hour, hour and a half to get home. We didn't talk a lot about it. Now, afterwards, from time to time, we would talk, but I always had sort of my perspective with her is, you're going to miss shots, you're going to make physical mistakes. That's just play hard. The only time I would ever say to her, the only time you're going to hear from me something negative is going to be when it didn't look like you were playing hard. Because that's controllable. You can control how hard you play. Can't always control if you miss a penalty kick or if you miss a shot. So, I think too many parents are too consumed with their children's youth sports, unfortunately. When I was a kid, I was just telling someone, parents dropped me off and said, "We'll see you when practice is over, or we'll see you, we're going to try to catch the game." And youth sports, I was in complete control of as a child. I think now too many parents are controlling their children's youth sports, which is a shame.
What did you feel like you had complete control over when you were a coach for your daughter?
I, you know, it wasn't, I loved coaching. I really did. I enjoyed it. If I could go back in time, I think I would have loved to have a career in coaching. But I enjoyed it. I think, again, the coaching the kids, and at the time I was coaching, they were, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And by the time she was 11, I was done coaching her. Um, Coaching the girls was easy. Coaching the girls was fun. If you can make sports fun and make them want to be out there, one, you play better if they're having a good time. And two, it just becomes a better experience. So the coaching the girls was easy. It was the parents. It's that's the parents. And people would say, like, why do you do well coaching young girls? Like, why do you do well as a coach? I said, it's really easy to coach an 8-year-old. It's really hard to try to coach or explain to a 40-year-old who acts like an 8-year-old.
Yes.
Okay. So I go, that's a much more difficult challenge. So, and I used to say that, but I loved it. I missed that. I do miss the coaching. It was a lot of fun.
How does the coaching, the experience there, being a parent, being a girl dad, how do those influences funnel themselves into what you do from a career perspective and how you
Yeah.
feel like they affect you there?
No, I think they go hand in hand. I mean, I think it's about leadership. It's about, adjusting your management style. Like when you're coaching, it's no different than in the office Monday to Friday or Monday through Sunday when you're working on live events. You have to adapt your management styles to others. You can't expect others to change for you. And the best coaches are the people who can figure out, how do I get the most out of that person or that player? And at work, it's the same thing. How do I work with and manage people so I can get the most out of them? How do they get the most out of me? Like I always tell people, I always surrounded myself with a lot of people that were nothing like me because I already know what I'm like. I already know what I bring to the table. It's the same thing. When you're coaching, you want a roster of players that are all diverse. You don't want, soccer team can't have all scorers. A basketball team can't have all shooters. So, it's very similar in that sense of knowing how to manage people and manage situations.
You do that as well, I would feel like, in a sense, when you're teaching as well, or at least you're overseeing situations where you get to work with that next generation. You talk about being
Yeah.
a coach and being a parent of that next generation. But then when you put on that professor hat as an adjunct professor at Syracuse, when you've gone there and now you get to teach those students. How enriching is that experience?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I have class tonight, and I teach it on Monday nights from 6 to 9. I excited to finally do it. I started a program at Fox called Fox Sports University, which by the time I left Fox, we were up to like 35 schools. So I've been around the country in classes, lecturing, being a part of the educational process, but was never a professor. I was like an incoming visiting speaker. So I was so excited when I finally was able to have the time, and Syracuse was nice enough to let me take part in their sports media program out here in LA. I love it. It's so much fun. Again, back to your point, how do you make it entertaining? How do you make the students enjoy class? You get 3 hours together. How do you make that engaging for 3 hours? In a generation of kids that are on their phone and looking at every TikTok in 15 seconds or less. So I really enjoy it. I enjoy the teaching because to me, the challenge is how do I make it fun? How do I get them to learn? And how do I get them to walk out of the class going, okay, I'm glad I learned that tonight, you know?
You mentioned TikTok, and not to put you on the spot, but if you had to make a 15-second video on TikTok that would describe your life, what sort of scenes, what would you want to say if you had that little nugget of time? And what is the shortest attention span that a lot of people have these days? What would you want to get out there?
Well, I think the first thing I do is I'd call my two daughters because they know a lot more about TikTok than I do. Um, yeah, if you want to know TikTok, call someone, and it's a fabric of their life. It's not a fabric of my life. That I will look at TikTok and Instagram when I, have time, but I don't. Younger generation definitely. It's a part of what they do every day. What would I do? I don't know. It's a really good question, and again, I like to think through. But I think it would probably have, if I was doing a 15-second TikTok, it would probably involve, the two of them and my wife, and it would probably involve a baseball field or a soccer field, and to what extent, whether I'm playing or they're, playing with me, it'd probably be something like that, or the obvious one they'd say is let's go to the golf course together because my daughters play a little bit and I love golf. So they would, Father's Day, we go to the golf course together. So I would envision it'd be something like that.
What spawned that love of golf for you?
Um, well, I grew up on a golf course in South Florida. Um, so it was my backyard. And I just saw my brother who lives on the East Coast, but I saw him yesterday and he was in town here in Southern California. And we were joking and talking about some of our younger days on the golf course, and as we sit around, I grew up on it. I, played a lot of golf as a child. I played every sport, but played a lot of golf and always enjoyed it. But I think it's a sport that you kind of, as you get on years, I now can afford to spend 4 or 5 hours on a golf course, whereas like 10, 15 years ago, when you have young children, you're at soccer fields and dance practice and things like that. I just always loved it, and it's a sport that I'll be able to play till I'm 80. I hung up my baseball cleats in the LA Hardball League about 20 years ago because I realized that was I was aging out of that, and the softball leagues and things of that nature.
If you're at address, you're teeing up on 18, you've got your driver in hand. What are you thinking at that moment, or what are you not thinking at that moment as you're about to hit?
Um, am I playing in a match? Am I playing in a tournament? Am I, I think the point is try not to think, and the thing is you're on 18th hole. So if I'm playing well, all I'm thinking about is how I played the first 17 holes. If I'm playing terrible and I'm on the 18th hole, I'm thinking about, oh God, the Barranca's to the right, the out of bounds is to the left. Oh no, don't go left, don't go right. And then I shank it, so golf, it's all about repetition and it's very psychological. When you're hitting the ball well, it just kind of flows. When you're hitting it terrible, it's hard to get out of that, get out of your own head, especially when you're an average golfer like me. I'm not a good golfer.
What are you talking about here? What are we shooting for 18 now?
I mean, I'm an 85, depending 80, 85, bad day 90. So just depends who I'm playing with, depends what the match is.
Depends if the person you're playing with allows mulligans or not. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But yeah, muscle memory is big for golf. How does that compute to what you're doing now in that you've built up all this repetition, you have all of this knowledge, and how you're able to apply it now when it comes to work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a competitive person, so I think it's a competitive spirit. So no matter what I'm doing, I'm competitive. Whether it's work in the office, you know, playing golf. But I think what I said about the mental side is it's important that you always take the lessons you learn. So I brought it up on the 18th hole, like what am I going to be thinking about versus the first 17 holes? Well, in business, you get into situations, it's repetition. Have I been in that situation before? Have I made a mistake? How do I learn from that? Hey, I even to this day have to say, maybe we should have looked at it this way, and then you put that in your memory bank and go, because a lot of what I've been involved in sports and marketing, it's there's no right or wrong answer a lot of times. It's not 1 + 1 = 2, So a lot of times it's being able to look at things from different perspectives and go, you know, did I make a mistake in the previous time, or should I have looked at this a different way, or should I have been more thorough? So I think that's an important part of what I apply all the time, to anything I do is how do you get better? I've said this to my kids, I say it to my students. There's two ways you get better: practice and you learn from your mistakes. They're the two most obvious ways to get better in life. And it's okay to make a mistake if you learn from that and don't make it again.
You said, finding out what's right. You've talked about that. How have you figured out that compass for knowing what's right when it comes to the decisions you make, whether it's family and what you feel is right or in work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's based on what expectations you have going into it. Like it's, in the marketing world, they were talking about ROI and return on investment
Yeah.
or KPIs. I think a lot of it is what was your expectation going to? What were you trying to get out of that? In most things, if you have a sound plan, like this is my strategy, these are the tactics, this is what we hope to get out of it. Um, I think you literally, if you apply it that way and go, okay, that's what I'm trying to reach, and do you reach that goal, or do you reach that end line? But that's a very linear path, and I think so much of what we do in sports is not linear. It's there's a lot of nuances to it, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and things can happen. I always tell people, like, live sports, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know who's going to get hurt. You don't know who. There's no crystal ball. Um, so I think it's important you have good plans, and I always say organization, be organized. If you're organized, you're ready to adapt to the curveballs or the things that change. Like if you have a plan, you're organized, and it's the same thing with my personal life. I always try to stay organized and make sure I have plans. My daughters, my wife know those plans, and it makes it easier for us to sort of adapt when we have to.
In that, in the eyes of you being really focused on organization in personally what you're doing and how that helps the working world and that helps you as a dad, when you have that ability to see through things like that, how does that impact all the people that work around you and they see that and they're inspired by the efforts that you're putting out there and how you're sort of lifting everybody up with you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I always say lead by example.
Yeah.
You know, again, and back to what we were talking about. There are subjective things. There are objective. There, look at, and I've said this my whole career. I've said it to my daughters, and I brought up the point about her playing soccer. About I don't care if you miss a shot wide. I care if you're playing hard. Well, you go into the workforce, and I say people, working hard is not, that's not subjective. Are you working hard or not? Are you giving your best effort? Are you the most talented person? Are you the best writer? Are you the best graphic person? Are you the most creative person? There's some relativity to that. That's kind of the eye of the beholder, like how talented somebody might be or how creative someone might be. But hard work's hard work, and so I always try to say, be the hardest working person. If you're the hardest working person, people see that, people follow it, people get inspired by it. And, it's, it, creative talent or, creative ability. Obviously, some people just have it and some people don't, but hard work's hard work.
How do you know if a matter needs to be attended to, say, urgently, or this is a situation where you can let it breathe and you can be patient?
Yeah. I've gotten better as I've gotten older on that one. I'll tell you that. I wish I could go back to my 25-year-old self. Um, Look, again, another thing I tell people all the time, like when you get that email and you don't like what it says, walk away. Don't respond. Walk away. Breathe. I've gotten so much better at that now. Like, when I say whatever it might be, if you just don't like what it says, you don't like the tone of it, you don't like, the best thing you can do is not respond to that right away. Go decompress, think about it, because your thought an hour or a day later might be different from when you initially read that. That's what I tell. It's the same thing when I was dealing with social media and kind of helping build that at Fox. It's a guy, don't react. That's like, so whether it's email or social media, you don't like the DM or you don't like the post, like breathe, because if you have any doubt about whether you should send that email or push that, post button, any doubt, then the answer is you shouldn't post it. You shouldn't do it. So like I said, I never had that issue with social media because I'm a big follower and observer. I'm not a big poster, but when it comes to emails, it's like, yeah, take a breath, take a breath, because how you see things 24 hours later might be drastically differently than when you first get them.
That's so clutch. I love that you said that's so important, and I think that that cannot be reiterated enough. Just that in what you said about how there's the emotional component that you might get as soon as you read that, but then you step aside and I or somebody else could have been interpreting the message wrongly. As you said, with what's written, you don't understand the tone. And I love what you said there. You said as well that you're not a poster, but you're a follower. What makes you think that that's the headspace that you've come into, and why have you gone about that way, doing things?
Yeah. People always ask me, why don't you post? Like even back in, my Fox days when a lot of my colleagues and people are working for me were really active on Twitter at the time, X or Instagram. And you should be posting, you should be putting, and here's what I said, and I stick to is that, you know, the things that I could post would bore the hell out of people. And the things that would really excite people, I can't post because I'm not allowed to share that, or that's something I don't want to share that happened in the conference room or behind the scenes that, so it's like, yeah, I have tons of great things that could really be intriguing to fans and consumers, but I don't want to be that person, you know? So that's why I've chosen not to take pictures of me and my dog on the weekend and post them and say, look at me, I'll let my daughters do that. Let my wife do that,
What,
you
what's your
know?
what's your reaction when they do that? When they post those pictures and you
Oh,
see
it's fine. They
yourself
don't
out
post.
there in the
No,
social
they don't
media world?
post me. I don't want to be on. They don't post me very much because I said like, yeah, I don't. Again, it's like that's again. I get people that want to do it. I'm fine with it. It's just not me wanting to publicize my personal life a certain way. And like I said, my professional life, the stuff that would be really exciting for people to read, can't post it. It's not. It's private. It's sensitive information. So I'd rather just observe. And I love looking. I mean, there's a lot of great things you can learn and follow and get from different accounts, but I'm just not one that wants to post.
With that said, where do you get your validation from then?
Certainly not social media. The
Exactly.
so uh, I don't know that I really thought about that, to be honest with you. I mean, my validation in life is my family. I mean, I career success matters. Don't get me wrong. But I work hard. But my validation comes from my wife and my two daughters. I mean, that's first and foremost. The sun rises and sets every day when it comes to them, and then work fits around that. But I get validation from enjoying what I do. I think I've had some ebbs and flows, in recent years about sports versus entertainment. But I love sports, and so validated by I think I've been lucky to be able to work in a field that I have had passion for since I was 4 years old. I've loved sports ever since I was young. Um, so I think the validation is just, enjoying what I do and being fortunate enough to have a really great family.
Last one from me. You touched on how the family can be that motivating, that driving force for you. When you think about your work and always being on the go, and you're a professor and you're
Mhm.
working in media and you're an executive, when do you feel when you're with your family that time seems to slow down the most?
Mhm. I don't really slow down, so that's like not. I think they kind of joke about that. Um, Kind of like you're I have like on and off.
Yeah.
I'm on, which means I'm moving 100 miles per hour. I'm asleep. There's not really a lot in between with me. But no, I don't know that it necessarily slows down per se like that with my family. I think you know, work's work, and again, when you choose to work in sports, especially live sports, things happen. My former colleagues yesterday at Fox had a long day because of a rain delay. All those folks who work in golf thought they would be at Riviera over the weekend for the Genesis were down in Torrey Pines instead because of the fires. So I don't know if it's necessarily say it slows down. Um, I think you have to take a step back and make sure that you compartmentalize work versus family, and so that you can spend the time with them. And I think that's I've done a good job is compartmentalizing, work versus working 7 days a week versus making sure you spend time to be with your family.
If I were to throw this one last one in, and I promise this is my last one, because you said that there's the on switch and then there's the off switch when you're sleeping. How often when you're sleeping, when you're dreaming, are you thinking about work?
No, no, I'm a pretty good. When I shut it down, I shut it down. I mean, now there are times where I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about something. Oh, damn, I got to do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
But no, I'm pretty good about when I shut it down, I shut it down, and I don't over, I don't allow it to consume me. I think there have been a few jobs and positions in my career that started to do that, and that to me that's not healthy. I think that if your job's keeping you up at night to an unhealthy nature, maybe you need to think about your job, um, or if your position or work. I mean, I've been fortunate; it hasn't really happened much, but yeah, when I put my head down the pillow, I'm done. And usually I'm not thinking about it until I wake up early the next morning and start reading all the blogs and get right back at it.
Well, we had a lot of fun getting at it here in this conversation. I feel like my job in as we wrap up this conversation is to create this comfortable space where we have some fun times. I feel like we did that. I don't want to read your
Yeah.
mind, Chris, but I
Oh
feel
no, I
like you
enjoyed it.
enjoyed this.
I did. Anytime I can talk about work and family and sports, I enjoy it. Like I said right before we got on started, this is what I love. This is what I enjoy. I mean, there's nothing better than talking about sports and Super Bowl party. Everybody's talking about the ratings and they're asking me, and I sent an email to a former colleague too about they were all the ratings. I'm like, I don't know, guys. I remember the Super Bowl in New York and Denver was getting killed by Seattle, and it turned out to be a record. So I love talking about it, and it was a pleasure talking to you. Known you for years, obviously dating back to your Fox Sports Radio days, and follow your UCLA allegiance. Glad you got a Syracuse orange in your family, and I appreciate you asking me about the professor because I'm proud of it. I love my alma mater. I love Syracuse, and I love that I get to be with students and help them on their journey as they're finishing up college and thinking about their career.
You're proud of them. You're proud of those you work with. You're proud of your wife. You're proud of your daughters. And what you might not be proud of is that with how much you like USC women's basketball, they are going to have to play UCLA another time in the regular season. And that's going to happen after we tape this podcast episode. So, yes, USC got the better of UCLA the first time. But, Chris, we might go 1-1, these two
Yeah, well,
teams
that second
before the
game's in Pauley,
postseason.
I think, right? So I
Yes.
live right by UCLA, so that second game's at Pauley. Maybe I'll make a trip over there with my Cardinal and gold on, just so I can, it's funny. I remember making the trip into Pauley years ago when because Syracuse basketball hasn't played here forever, but I would guess this is probably 97 around there when it was Baron Davis, Earl Watson, and Syracuse came out here to Pauley and I go in there with my 44 jersey and they got slaughtered by the Bruins. It was I don't think they've been back to Paulie since. So
Well, if you do go, let me know. And if I
yeah,
do see you there, I think it'll be pretty easy to find you with what you
yeah.
said you're going to be wearing. Chris Hannan, head of sports Trailer Park Group, also as mentioned, adjunct professor at his alma mater, Syracuse, has a class later tonight that he has. So thrilled to have him on for this short bit to look at life, to look at his career and everything in between. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the On to Something Sports Media podcast. I broadcast different games and sports for different networks, and I can't thank you enough, Chris, for doing this and sitting down with me. This surely was a joy. I really like this.
Thank you very much, Brian.